Evan Barker has been for quite some time now working her way up the ladder of the Democratic Party. She began back in 2008 as an intern in Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, the one that she ended up losing to Barack Obama for the Democratic presidential nomination. She worked as well for the Democratic Party during the Obama years, through the Trump years, and then also into this year. But last month, she attended the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, where she started having some epiphanies, things that I believe, and we're going to ask her in just a second, were things that were kind of bubbling up, but that really came to the surface when she saw what the DNC was and how the party was presenting itself. And that led her to publish this very thought-provoking and compelling article in Newsweek that bore this headline, quote, "I raised millions of dollars for Democrats, but at the DNC, I realized they're the party of the rich." And it goes on to offer multiple other critiques of the Democratic Party, including their donor base, as well as their foreign policy. And when I read the article, I immediately thought to myself, I want to have the author on my show because I thought so many of her critiques are worth hearing. Evan, thank you so much for taking the time to come on our show and talk to us. It's great to see you.
Hi, Glenn. It's so nice to meet you. I can't believe I'm here.
Yes, you are here, and we're very happy to have you. So let me just begin by asking you a couple questions about your sort of personal trajectory, which I think is a crucial part for understanding the context of what you wrote and kind of what your thinking is. I think a lot of people empathize with your trajectory when it comes to the Democratic Party. But talk about, I sort of gave the skeletal version, but talk about your entrance into the Democratic Party, kind of what drove it, and how over the years you've come to take on more and more important roles.
Right. So I'm originally from the Midwest. I'm from the Kansas City area, and I come from a family of union workers that have long supported Democratic candidates and have been Democrats. And I was also born with a rare genetic lung disease similar to cystic fibrosis. I wasn't actually diagnosed with the disease until I was 15 years old. So I was in high school actually at the time, which is why I think I was sort of ignited and working for Democrats, because I realized, and I had experiences as a child of being denied health insurance because of my pre-existing condition. So even before they actually knew what it was, they were still denying me health care. I had to go in high-risk pools. It put a lot of stress on my family. My parents divorced when I was 10 months old, and my mom's family has always been very blue collar. My dad was a very small business owner. It was just him working for himself and, no employees, just him. And so I saw the struggle that it placed on my family, and this sort of animated me in high school to get involved in politics. Both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama talked about universal health care, and also outlawing the pre-existing conditions clause where insurance companies were allowed to deny you based on that condition. And so that's what originally got me involved in politics. I will say I started noticing, even at a very young age, the hypocrisy in Democratic politics. And as I reflect on it now as an adult, I can see my younger self sort of pushing some of these ideas down inside. I remember when I was interning on Barack Obama's campaign in high school, I remember that a lot of the other interns that were there working did not have backgrounds similar to mine. They didn't grow up in the socioeconomic conditions that I did. They didn't face being denied healthcare as a child. Actually, a lot of them were the children of donors who were throwing fundraisers for Obama with Ted Kennedy and, others. So I felt like they got preferential treatment on that campaign. And, that's something that I sort of pushed down inside. And then I continued to see this. I mean, it wasn't just isolated to that experience. It continued to play out, throughout my career. And for the last 4 years, I have become very disenchanted with the Democratic Party just through seeing them promote endless proxy wars. I was somebody when I was a child that spoke out even, in middle school against the Iraq War. And so it's been very confusing for me to see them champion sending $175 billion to Ukraine. And when having conversations about this with other people that I work with in Democratic politics, they don't seem bothered by it at all. Or if they are, they're just being quiet for the sake of, not wanting to upset anyone and lose their job or whatever. So I don't know if I had gone to the DNC, if I actually would have written this op-ed or not. I might have just carried on with my quiet little existence and just slowly faded away from working in politics, as I kind of have been, over the last couple of years. But I went and I felt absolutely disgusted by what I experienced. I felt like I was in a building with the most elite and out of touch people in the world, people that probably have never been to Missouri or have even met people like my family, or could even begin to understand what they've gone through the last couple of years with inflation and how the economy has been. So I just felt very, very angry. And when I went home, I initially posted a video to TikTok to 60 people. And the next day, that video had millions and millions of views. And that's what spurred me to write the op-ed. I wanted to take the opportunity to really crystallize my thoughts and put them down on paper.
And I'm glad you did. So I just have to say, I find this background of kind of how you were inculcated with this mythology of the Democratic Party so wildly in contrast to the reality of it. So interesting, because I think so many of us are the byproduct of this. I remember when I was young, my first political memories were of my grandparents who were came of age in the Great Depression and then viewed FDR as the savior of the country because of all these social programs, and always identified the Democratic Party as the working class party, the party of the workers and the poor, and the Republican Party as the party of the big corporations and the rich, which was, not entirely untrue for many decades in the middle of the 20th century. And you just see now by polling, there's a giant migration of working class people from the Democratic Party to the Trump movement. And in turn, a lot of affluent suburbanites and very wealthy people like Dick Cheney, in fact, and the head of Goldman Sachs, who are supporting the Kamala Harris campaign. Now, in my time at working as a journalist, I'm a little tiny bit older than you. I think I was in high school during the Obama presidency, not in middle school as you were, but I've seen a lot. Oh no, I was just kidding. So I'm a little bit older than you though. But I've seen in the 20 years of I know I don't look it, and you can feel free to say that at any time. But in the 20 years where I've been doing journalism, there have been a lot of articles written that have a very surface similarity to the one you wrote. I've been a Democrat for so long, but now I'm leaving the Democratic Party. And usually these are coming from people. Are you able to hear me okay? Well,
yes. Okay. Yes, sorry. It's just my microphone, but keep going.
No, it's okay. So oftentimes these are people who say, I always believed in the Democratic Party, but now the Democratic Party has moved so far to the left on this issue and that issue that I don't recognize it anymore, and they become Republicans. There's so many people like that over the past 20 years, pundits and politicians. It's a very lucrative thing to do if you're in punditry to say that. You are coming at this from a much different perspective, at least as I understand your Newsweek article, which is not at all, the Democratic Party has moved far to the left. You really seem to be looking at it through this prism that I think is far more relevant these days than left versus right, which is anti-establishment versus pro-establishment, because you also talk about the foreign policy of the Democratic Party and what it's kind of become. So in terms of these specific policy issues, can you talk a little bit more about those? And what was it specifically about the Democratic National Convention? I mean, I think you mentioned Oprah Winfrey's speech. Just a couple of the kind of turning points for you that really just made that unsustainable.
Yeah. And I just want to say, for the people that have said that the Democratic Party has become too progressive or too left, I would counter that with, if you look at a state like Missouri, the people there generally love Donald Trump, right? Missouri has been a state that's gone red over the last decade or so. But they actually vote for very progressive economic things. So they, for example, they voted to fight back right to work. They voted to raise the minimum wage to $15. They voted to make marijuana recreationally legal. So I think what the Democratic
Well,
Party
and also, if I could just
realize-
interject there quickly, just to add to that point. I mean, the Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri, who's widely viewed as this harshly conservative far-right politician, was the person who stood by Bernie Sanders to filibuster the COVID Relief Act because it had no direct payments to the American people, and he actually succeeded in getting direct payments to the American people once and Trump even vetoed the bill and said, no, it has to be even higher. And then also, as we just heard from the Teamster Union president, Josh Hawley and J.D. Vance have been among the most pro-union people. They're very supportive of Lena Khan, who works in the FTC, kind of combating. So you see, this is what I mean by this left-right framework is not so telling anymore.
Right, exactly. And there's, the horseshoe theory of but the Democratic Party doesn't seem to understand that working class people are very receptive to some of these economic progressive populist messages, but what they're not receptive to is being lectured to or told that they're racist. And that's what I think I have just witnessed a lot over the last couple of years, especially since 2020. Going back to the convention, yeah, I think just seeing people like Oprah Winfrey there, giving speeches, hearing speeches about hope and joy, and nothing really substantial policy-wise. At the time that I went to the convention, I think Kamala Harris still hadn't even put up an economic or any policy positions actually on her website. And I felt like it was just really creepy being there and listening to other people talk and just how everyone just seemed to be going along with it. It's like everyone was high, like everybody had drank some sort of elixir that just put them under the spell of being like, this is fine, this is cool, this is what we're doing, And I did sort of try to push back on people a little bit. I would say does this feel kind of weird to you that, the Democrats have been talking about the fact that democracy is on the ballot for the past couple of years, and what we're doing right now doesn't feel very democratic. And people would say things to me like, well, Evan, we voted for Kamala Harris when we voted for Joe Biden. Well, if that were the case, then Dick Cheney would have become the nominee. That's not really how it's supposed to work. And so, yeah, it was just it was just the display of groupthink, the lack of dissent. I must say, having been somebody that for a very long time has been very openly critical of the Republican Party, that was so much easier to do. Even when I was critical of the Republican Party to Republicans, they were generally nicer to me about it. I'm from Missouri. I know a lot of Republicans back home, right? When you're critical of the Democratic Party, if you say anything that goes against the line, you are automatically labeled, a whatever phobic or, like evil or hateful or, there's just no room for critical thinking.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So I think.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, so yeah, I mean, we did this segment last night that I thought was so eye-opening, and it was also so relevant to what you said, where an MSNBC host, Alex Wagner, went to Michigan, and she kind of sat down with these union workers in Michigan. And, whenever it has always this feel that these, people are going from New York and Washington to this field trip to these exotic places to look at these unknown species. And, she asked them about January 6th, and they were like, they barely remembered what January 6th was. They didn't care about it at all because why would they? It was 4 years ago. It was a 3-hour riot in the Capitol. It's not what they're thinking about every day. And then she also asked about Donald Trump's lawsuits, and they were just like, these are not the things that I'm worried about but it's the kind of thing, and then if you look at the event that Oprah Winfrey hosted for Kamala Harris, obviously it was devoid of any concerns about material needs of people of healthcare and education and transportation, because Oprah Winfrey and all those other George Clooney and billionaires and Kamala Harris have lived these lives completely. Yeah. And one of the things you wrote in the article was, Democrats love to decry money in politics when it comes to the Koch brothers or Elon Musk, but the billionaires who support Democrats are given a total pass and have a huge influence over policy. Now, one of the things that amazes me is if you look at, say, Lena Khan, who's been, going after drug companies over the fact that, medications in the United States cost 15 times more than they cost in Western Europe or even in Canada, or breaking up, big, gigantic corporations because of terrible public service where you can't, you wait 3 hours on the phone. These are incredibly popular policies, but Kamala Harris can't talk about them because her donors and the donors of the Democratic Party hate Lena Khan and want her gone. Having been kind of in the party, working your way up, like what is that interaction between donors and the policies of the party?
It's wild. I mean, it was like cognitive dissonance for me so there's this process, I don't know if you're familiar, but what candidates do actually to get elected is they spend 8, 9, 10 hours a day making calls to rich people. It's called call time. And so part of my job was to prepare the notes for that grueling call session, research and find donors for them to call and basically pitch themselves to, strike up a conversation, try to connect with them and hear them out and hear what they found to be important. And obviously, this creates a huge problem because the politician is just spending all of their time talking to rich people in California and New York all day long. Sure, they do talk to voters a little bit, but the majority of their time is just spent talking to very rich people on the phone. So I would actually hear, especially progressive candidates, say things like, oh, the Koch brothers this, or Elon Musk this, they're trying to end democracy. They're trying, they'd have all these different talking points, but then they turn around and I'd hand them the call sheet and the next person would be like Alexander Soros, or Reid Hoffman would be somebody that would come up. And with those people, it's like they could never like publicly criticize them in their speeches, because they were rich, but they were the ones that were giving them money. And so that was just seeing this process play out over and over and over again is part of the reason that I'm sitting here talking to you, is because when I first got into politics, I really, really thought that if we just got the right people elected, that things could change. And now I figured out through watching the system, and I know it's the same on the Republican side too. It is. It has to be, okay? That the system is truly, it's not just broken, like I said in my article. It's designed to be this way. It's designed to keep true representation in this country from ever happening. And on top of spending all of this time just calling rich people, a lot of times the politicians themselves, well, like 99% of the time, I think, have to either know other rich people or they have to be rich themselves. Okay, so that automatically disincludes any real representation for working class people. The first thing that they do when you say that you're going to run for office, these Democratic groups, I'm not going to name specific names, but the first thing they do is they'll get their people on the phone and they'll say to the candidate, they don't ask them about their policy. They'll first ask them what their networks are like, how they plan to fund their campaign. That's literally the only thing that they care about. And so seeing this process play out over and over and over and over and over just made me cynical. And I think for the first time in a really long time, the last few weeks, being able to speak out on these things has finally made me a little hopeful again.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
At least I can use experiences.
I mean, that one of the things I thought was interesting about the Trump 2016 campaign was that, he was one of the very few people ever to just basically explain all that. I remember him saying in one of these debates, oh yeah, I just send money to politicians and then I immediately get them on the phone and get them to do whatever I want because I'm giving them money. And that's exactly how it works. And it's just never spoken of that way. All right, let me ask you one last thing in the little time that we have left. And I think it's funny because I read your Newsweek article. I'm sure like 10 million more people actually saw your video on TikTok than read your Newsweek article. Yeah. So people should check out each of those. But sort of as you were describing the incipient stage of your political consciousness, like becoming kind of aware of politics, paying attention to it in the Hillary Clinton campaign. So that was in the Bush-Cheney years. That was right around the same time that I was getting involved in journalism, like really devoting myself less to law and more to politics. And I remember so well, I mean, Dick Cheney and the neocons were talked about in ways that Democrats now talk about Trump, that they stole the 2000 election, that they were bloodthirsty and warmongers who wanted to go to war for corporate profit and because they had a sociopathic indifference to the lives of foreigners, all of which I agreed with and still agree with. And yet now you see this, widespread endorsement of Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party from those very same people, including Dick Cheney. And one of the things you said in your article, though, it focuses most on domestic policy and this issue of financing, was, quote, perhaps the most shocking of all is how the Democrats have embraced Bush-era foreign policy to become the party of war instead of rebuilding the working class communities that have been hardest hit by their neoliberal trade policies. They've spent $175 billion funding the war in Ukraine. I think so little attention is paid to how much communities like the one that you come from are struggling at the time that we send tens and hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars to Israel to fuel their wars. Can you just talk about this relationship that you've come to see between how much money we spend on foreign wars and filling the coffers of Boeing and General Dynamics on the one hand, and how people are living not on Oprah Winfrey's estate, but in the middle of the country on the other?
I mean, there's a lot of people in Missouri that don't even have access to broadband internet. During the pandemic, when they shut down the schools and a lot of the kids, weren't able to go to school, there's articles, that you can read about, but a lot of these kids actually had to go sit in McDonald's parking lots to get Wi-Fi so that they could attend school. So, the communities there, a lot of them are just really economically depressed. They're really struggling. They need good jobs. They need one party or both parties to start paying attention to them again. I don't know if they realize it, the Democrats realize it, but the people there do make the connection between their lives and the way that they're struggling and where their tax dollars are going. I hear this all the time from people back home. So it's extremely frustrating to see us just continually perpetuate these foreign proxy wars that are endless, because that's what they are. Like, we are at war, and send money to defense contractors and then not build up the communities back home that have had their jobs shipped overseas by Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan, and has been continued to be perpetuated in the last couple of decades. And it's just exhausting, and it honestly makes me sick to my stomach.
Yeah,
so I'm grateful for people like you for bringing attention to it.
Yeah, no, I'm really appreciative of what you did. I can see now why your TikTok on this viralized. It's because you speak very stripped away from any kind of ideological dogma or partisan fervor. It's just a very plain spoken and clear, but also very informed kind of from the inside as well, understanding of what the political process has become and how both parties function. And I think it just resonates when you just describe the political system in very clear ways. So instead of fading away, I hope you're going to continue to use these platforms to speak out, because I think more voices like yours are needed. And I really appreciate your time, taking the time to come on and talk to us tonight.
Thank you so much, Glenn. It was great to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Have a great evening. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.